Right, we are live. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to interview Violet Whitney. She is adjunct assistant professor at Columbia University and director of product management at Cytolex. Before we start the interview, I want to admit two things. So, uh, Violet shared me her articles on Medium, and I was like reading all of it, and it dates back to 2017. And she has compiled amazing list of resources. And when I was reading about an article which was published in 2017 about microservices, I must say I became a fan of your work. It was like you were talking about this at that time, which is like quite cutting edge and pushing the boundary. And I learned about the microservices and potential of it recently. So thanks a lot for open sourcing all of your knowledge with us, and it has been amazing.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So, Violet, my first question is, can you share a few moments which got you into the tech space? And I have seen where like a decent amount of people who get into the tech space leave the AEC space. So, what made you stick to AEC?
Um, I don't know. I I think part of it is just being um of this generation where um I worked for quite a while in this big architecture practice called Smith Group JJR back in 2006. And at the time, I think a lot of new technology companies were coming about, like Airbnb and all these things that were really changing the way people used spaces. But they weren't like the way you would typically think about like architecture, technology. Um, I also was learning CAD right at the time when BIM was coming out. And so that was like also a big shift. And a lot more was shifting towards performance, like lead credentials. And so I think like seeing all of that emerge changed my thinking to what I like to say is like architecture, the verb versus the noun. So rather than being about designing the building, it's about like the performance, the programming, and the choreography of space. So like there's all this performance analysis for when you build a building. How does it behave after the fact? How, sustainability analytics or like occupancy analytics. And Airbnb and the kind of programming and use of spaces is really about the verb, like how the spaces are used and how you can choreograph and design for kind of activities and the potential of space to do things. So it's like not just thinking about the physical part of it. And that was like I think there were many things along the lines that led to more of that hypothesis where it was like, oh yeah, technology can think about is so dynamic that it allows us to think not just about the physical thing, but all the use of it, which is really like what it's about is its utility or like the verb part, not just the physical thing.
Got it. And the reason you 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 didn't transition to other spaces and stuck.
Oh yeah. Why didn't I leave AEC? Well, I think on one side, it's easy to make the case going into the tech industry in that's AEC tech that you're well suited to be there. It's like a smaller gap for someone to say like, oh, I see your architecture background doing tech oriented things is relevant to this software product. Whereas it might be a bigger gap if I'm like, oh, I'm going to go work at Amazon logistics. But that being said, I really think that this other working for Amazon logistics, or like even Seamless one, or like Grubhub. Those are all spatial problems. And so to me, they kind of are architecture, but we just need to do a better job in coining that as an industry to like accept that as this is architecture, thinking about the programming and use of space and technology spatially is architecture. We need to adopt it. And then that also helps us lobby for positions where, you know, someone can go and interview at something like Grubhub, and someone would understand, oh, I understand why you're here. You're doing like spatial data visualization and logistics and movement, and you're thinking about like the touch points of an individual in physical space. So it's more like, I think it's a little bit, I feel kind of guilty saying this, like everything's architecture. It's like, yeah, of course you would say that with an architecture background, but I kind of feel like that.
Got it. And so one thing I found like interesting about the course is like you started this course a while back, and I'm just imagining like it's rare to find courses like this at this moment. So what prompted you to like initiate such kind of a course, and what were the challenges in developing the course?
Yeah. Oh, this is a great question. So Gabby Brainerd actually reached out to me because we had a kind of a similar boss at Columbia. She was teaching another course, and her background is actually in envelope systems and performances. She like developed the envelope system for one of the highest residential tower in New York. So she's pretty BA, is badass. And so she reached out to me because he was like, hey, maybe you should talk to Violet. She's thinking about performance and like behavior. Maybe you can teach a class together. And we just started talking about kind of like a bit of like passion projects. Gabby recommended this book to me called How to Do Nothing by Jenny Odell. If you haven't read it, it's all about the attention economy and really about like, you know, how so many sensors and smart home products kind of try to optimize your life. It's all about efficiency and like catching your attention to do things. And we were like, how can we use all these systems to do nothing? Which really, like, doing nothing is much more about checking in with life and like more meditative, if anything. So we just got really excited about that premise. That's kind of how it came about. And also just a recognition that like so much tech right now is really flat. Like, you know, you have UX designers are really thinking about the page on a phone devoid of the context of who you're with, where you're with, or where you are. Like, so we thought, you know, taking all these different things like service design and human computer interaction and tangible computing and architecture and trying to understand how they relate to each other as a system can be really useful. And yeah, there's like too much to say there. But when we started the course, you know, you were talking about some of the problems. One of the funniest things that's really interesting is like a lot of people, there's a lot to work out right now with smart home products. So we ran into all the types of troubles. Getting permissions at Columbia to put sensors everywhere or allow students to put up cameras has like privacy issues. There's getting on the Wi-Fi. That's Columbia's Wi-Fi is very locked down. You can't just put up a Wi-Fi network. Students would install things that like changed lights and it would like piss people off, which is very valid. I mean, I think, you know, when you turn a light on and off in a room, that's part of the building and it's already kind of adopted by everyone. When you change the governance of that system and only certain people have access to it, there's like all kinds of questions about like who's making these decisions. We ran into issues where like so many of these sensors are set up for, and smart home products are set up for individual users, but people are trying to use them in groups or as a group of roommates, and they don't know how to function for teams. So there's like all these things that just haven't been sorted out around the technology that we like ran into. We got so many random emails from the administration getting in trouble, which was like very warranted. It's just like people haven't figured this out yet. We're trying to. It's chaos.
Yeah, and like, was there any like low point where you thought about just giving up?
No, I think only. I don't know. There was a point when I was installing a additional Wi-Fi network and hiding it under a desk. That was a low point. But no.
I see. And like one thing which like I don't see often people talking about is like setting up IoT system and sensors is one thing, but also like ensuring it's like very secure. Not anyone can hack the system. So can you like tell us about what are the things one should consider?
Yeah. Have a good password. That's always number one. I think one thing we've done in the class is we switched from having the projects be in Colombia, where there's all kinds of other considerations because you're in a public space and that there's kind of an openness there, to being in their homes, which is a bit more controlled because you have to be within a certain proximity. I think who you give permissions to is really important. One thing that's also difficult about the course is because for folks that don't know, we use if this then that, which is a microservice that lets you have various sensors and smart home products and applets on the web talk to each other. So you can say like, oh, if this occupancy sensor triggers, or like someone walks through the door in my house, send an email, or like turn on a power switch somewhere else. And so because each one of those is associated with your identity, it like will need permissions to your email to send an email. It will need your calendar if it's like based on time of day. It's going to need access to your home. So it's really important that you work with services that are safe and secure. There's a lot of like new sensor products out there, which I think are definitely a danger once you have all these things strung together. I don't have any real advice other than like try and be scrutinizing when you connect something and always have good passwords.
Got it. And I'm curious, like since you started this course a while ago, have you seen any like startups from your alumni or students who learn that who are doing in like this Internet of Things space, or any developments in the architectural practice coming out of this?
Ooh, I hope so. Not formally yet, or nothing that I can like pat myself on the back about, where I'm like, yeah, I hope someday. But there were some students that went on. One student is sticking out in my head that went on to do a PhD program. I can't remember if it was Carnegie Mellon or somewhere else. That was more closely associated. I also don't remember the degree. It was like more closely associated with human computer interaction. So I do think I'm seeing more students kind of pursue this as a career. I think one thing that's difficult right now is that this really feels like a new kind of industry that hasn't been well coined. Like there's a lot of spatial computing and ambient computing starting to emerge, but I don't know that I like really see an open position that's like spatial computing designer, ambient computing designer. So I think it's a little bit more of a loose, like you kind of have to be entrepreneurial and make the case to someone that this is what you want to do versus like, I think computational design, or if you're working in like design automation or like working in generative design type of systems, that's better understood and there's explicit roles for it.
I see. And like one thing I feel that there are a lot of translations from this course which could be adopted in daily practice, like the way the sensors and communicate, how you get into the database and platform, how you make action, automate the workflow, and those are interesting things. So I'm curious, like, can you give us an overview about like the whole data pipeline or the workflow and what kind of frameworks or software do you use?
Yeah. So on the hardware side, students usually work with like power plugs, smart home systems like lights and Amazon Echoes. We use projectors a lot because they're like very good at making like digital things very spatial, mapping it to like a wall or a door. And then on the software side, if this and that is the primary thing that ties together different services. And then outside of if this then that, we have also worked with processing. So what's really good about the processing library or processing and all the associated libraries is you can do things with computer vision where you can track like number of faces or facial expression was one student project that like changed a lighting system based on how many people were happy or sad at a party. So yeah, I think those are the main things. One thing I haven't used as much as I would like to is like more macros that you can do on a Mac or on really anything. There's a lot more of these. I think even on iPhones now you can set up kind of simple recipes. So I think it as more programs or like more technology is set up in a way to let non-software engineers program logic, it like really extends the functionality of the types of dynamic systems someone can design. Because you can say like, oh, if this happens on my phone, then like have that happen in a room or for this computer. So
I see. I just had a thought it would be interesting to operate this from Telegram or like make a bot on Discord or something.
yeah, totally.
Yeah. So the next question I have is, are you like planning to use this data for any machine learning purposes, or like was there any insight from this data which was counterintuitive?
No, there isn't really a big like data tracking aspect to this. So I think, you know, something that big companies are able to do, like in Amazon, if you have Amazon Echoes everywhere, you're probably getting a crap ton of data from everyone, and you can understand patterns in how people use certain recipes. In the context of a class, we have really one-off prototypes. So it's like, I'm going to build a system that's going to change the temperature when the stocks are doing poorly or something. It's going to get really hot in my room or something. And I'm going to see what kind of, how that changes the way I live, or how it changes my behavior and thinking. So it's much more custom and one-off. Like you have that one prototype or example versus a company that has batches and batches of information that they can kind of learn from many instances. So we have the kind of like individualized ground up approach, I would say, for learning.
Got it. And you before we move on to your newly launched master's program, is there anything which you would like to say about this course which we didn't cover?
No, just I feel like check it out if you're interested in this kind of thing. I guess if it wasn't explicit enough, just a personal theory or hypothesis is that right now, and I just really like saying this because I think it's catchy, is that I think we should move away from user experiences that are individual to social experiences, like really think about the group and the context when you're designing a technology, and away from user interface that's really about like just an interface to a spatial interface. Think about what you're interacting with in an environment or spatially versus on a flat screen or a flat phone.
I see. So do you envision that in future architects will play more kind of a role in, apart from like physical built environment, like digital virtual spaces curation and experiences curation?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's going to be, you already see ambient computing and you see it with wearables. Facebook just came out with like the Ray-Ban, what are they called? Ray-Ban. And we got the smartwatches. Like we're already starting to think much more about how do I do the things I do on a computer in physical space. And I just think architects are really well suited because they're thinking about where things happen over time. Like I think we'll be thinking a lot more about how technology changes physical environments and like how that should be designed versus like they're something totally separate. You have a phone and you have a room. It's like, well, you have the phone in the room. What are you doing with the phone in the room, and how does that change what you're doing in the room?
And I feel like also like our attention is being like either diverted to our smartphone or like to the physical spaces. So you are also fighting with them. So
yeah, there's like kind of like architects against the technology because they're like, people are checked out of the physical space, which is warranted, but it's like they need to fuse a little more.
correct. And like it's interesting that you mentioned about attention economy. So I found this article quite interesting about platform society. So like, can you give us an overview about this?
Yes. So let's see. I guess the fascination, this is from the data mining the city class, which really focuses on simulation. We do a lot of agent-based models. So it's like, how do we map behavior spatially? I guess the big premise of the class is that all these technologies have spatial implications, just like I was talking about with like Amazon or Seamless. The where you live is very much choreographed and dictated by the search algorithms you use for finding an apartment. So Street Easy is already saying whether you're going to be in certain neighborhoods based on if there's an elevator, if you check that box in the building. And and it's not that systems didn't exist before that choreograph us or push us into different spaces. It's just rather than it being a phone book or some of these other systems, now it's encoded in the logic of a menu in a UI or something. The really provocative one I like to say is that Tinder's matching algorithm is leading to more marriages and matches and marriages each year. And its algorithm is ultimately shaping the genetic makeup of the human race, because the way they do their matches or who you see is really dependent on like what future generations will come about. If that's how you're meeting people, that matching algorithm is shaping our genetic code. So there really are like social and spatial implications of the internet. The whole premise of this class is like, how can we try and model and understand that behavior? If I make a change to the algorithm for how Uber finds me, how does that change how people move in a city or that kind of thing?
Quite interesting. And do you have like specific examples how like using either IoT or like in a smaller scale at room scale, how one could change user behavior, and also at a macro scale, what are the ways through architecture we can do that?
Yeah, well, let's say your the sound in your room is attached to a speaker. This is like something that they do on stock trading floors. And the music gets faster or higher tempo when the market is going crazy. So that has a behavior where all of a sudden the people working on that floor have a kind of ambient sense of this other thing that they have to care about. So that's like kind of a macro scale. Macro or micro? Oh, I get them confused. That's an individual person scale. Mm-hmm. At the city scale, just think about some of the maybe more horrendous examples. What was in Egypt? There was this big event where something was posted on Facebook about getting together, and ultimately ended in people dying, but also like a huge political revolution. So that has spatial and social implications. Someone posted something, people got together. But you know, even things like changing the algorithm for Uber might change where people wait and where people congregate in a city, or like changing the way people find restaurants changes where you explore in a city. Like I didn't even know about a lot of these restaurants if I'm walking around, but maybe I find out about certain places via review, and it really reshapes what I know of as the city.
I see. And I don't know, like I feel sometimes that like architecture and city planning, the level of impact they used to have before has been now shifting more towards tech, where they are controlling user behavior inside a building or at the city scale. So do you feel like it's high time architects should learn technology, coding, and take like take back more like impactful roles?
Yeah, I think I think both have a big impact, but there's no denying that technology like Airbnb or Uber have more drastic impact than the kind of physical technologies that we've developed. You know, the elevator definitely changed the way we use cities, but for this era, Airbnb and Uber like take the cake. So I don't think that it's that. I think there's a utility in knowing how to program because you understand a certain level of thinking. What I want to caution against is I think a lot of architects have a little bit of like the kind of physics envy of software engineering, and they're like, I can't participate in technology unless I am a software engineer. And I think that's just misguided. Like, we live in such a complex world where we need to appreciate other people's expertise. Let the software engineer be a software engineer. And that doesn't mean like a software engineer couldn't have a kind of architecture bent, or maybe you really want to be a software engineer, and that's okay too. But there's also a place, and one reason I'm so in love with microservices and macros is I think there's also a place for designing these types of systems, and you need to be thinking at a kind of abstract level, not writing individual functions and figuring out how that's going to scale for an enterprise system. Like that's just like a whole other level of depth. And we need designers that can think about programming, how behavior is changed based on a technology spatially, and design those systems, which requires maybe some programming logic, but really it's not like writing code. Maybe it's like making these prototypes, seeing how it behaves in physical space, making simulations that try and understand spatially, what does that mean at scale? If we change, like if we change music in a room, run a prototype with sensors and see what happens. Now make an agent-based model to see what happens at scale for a city if you make that change more like systemically. So I think that's kind of the level of abstraction that designers could be working with if they're thinking about these systems.
I see. Like, I totally resonate with that thought. Like, I feel like one should understand the language of coding and understand the possibilities, so that like they could, instead of reinventing the wheel, they might be able to use APIs or calling out those functions and then get the work done.
Totally. I feel like this is maybe going off on a rant, but I have a bit of a frustration in architecture as well. Like, I think architecture firms especially have architects that have both like a lot of deep knowledge, but also are generalists. And sometimes what ends up happening is there's a kind of feeling that we already have the expertise in-house. Oh, we can make the marketing pamphlets. Oh, we can do the graphic design. Oh, we can, we'll develop the website. And while there's like a certain scrappiness that's useful, and because so many architecture firms start as are like individually bootstrapped, they're very risk averse to like hiring someone to do a separate thing, which is totally warranted. But I think it also holds architects back, because they end up trying to do everything. And it's like, you're not the expert on everything. Like, let people do their job. So cross-disciplinary, like being cross-disciplinary is great, but not at the expense of like taking over other expertise. Like, you should work with other people that really have deep knowledge in something that you don't have.
Yeah. And I think since we are on this rant, I would also like to know your thoughts on like why we are not seeing open source collaboration in architecture tech space.
Yeah. Well, I think that has a lot to do with the way the industry is structured. So part of it probably has to do with like risk and professional liability, where it's like, if you develop a custom script that's how to lay out an apartment, can someone come back and sue me later? I think there's also somewhat of a difference in, I don't know exactly what the difference is between that and like maybe software engineering in a typical sense. I'm trying to think of like what's a good open source project we could compare it to. but
Processing.
yeah, processing. So processing a bunch of artists, there's a big benefit to sharing uh, a, a custom library or a custom script. You get kind of credit or credentials. People are like, ooh, look at this person that used this library. Now I'm using it. I get a lot of benefit if I share my processing library, like get street cred in the processing community. I inadvertently probably make money through those credentials. So it's very individual artist driven as well. In the AEC industry, you have big architecture firms who are developing scripts as part of what they charge for as a service. And so when if you give that out, what do you get in return? Does the architecture firm really get street cred? Other developers probably don't care if one architecture firm's like got this sweet script they're sharing on the market, in the same way that an artist would get street cred for sharing their script with other artists. So maybe that's a little bit of it.
I see.
It's like it's an advantage to have a proprietary method to quickly lay out apartments. It's like a competitive advantage against other architecture firms. I don't think that I don't think that it's unforeseeable that there would be things that could be opened. But maybe there are certain things that need to be in place, like maybe the architecture service model needs to evolve a little bit in how we charge. And maybe also the professional liability is a big question.
Got it. Yeah, I was just wondering because sometimes even like Google, Apple, or Microsoft open source part of their work, and which could have like provide them like competitive edge. So yes, I'm just wondering, is there anything like we can do to change this in our industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it starts with can come from the culture, and I think already there's a lot of architecties, different conferences where kind of people in the computational design type space are participating. I think there's a lot of desire to share, and like a lot of the conferences actually come out of this this desire to share things back and forth. So I think it kind of exists there, and it can be pushed for. And then I think for people within their companies, they should be like culturally trying to find opportunities for pricing in that way, or like as a product manager, it's definitely something that we think about and talk a lot about, is like what are different ways of creating something that's more accessible to a wider group where sharing is available, and how do we mitigate the risk, and how do we also make it still sustainable financially. So I think it's doable. It's just like I think it's harder for architecture firms to figure that out, maybe because you're usually already burning the candle at both ends to like figure out how to structure an open source software is maybe intense.
I see. And like I found like this article quite useful for like different conferences you listed, which is outside AEC domain, but also like quite interesting, and one could find inspirations about those development in that industry. So
yeah, totally.
So can you give us an like overview about how this program, what is this new master's program, and what are things or courses you have added that differentiates?
Yeah. Okay. So Laura Kurgan is the program director overseeing this new program, which is a master's in computational design practices um, at Columbia GSAP. And I think it came from a recognition that the school already has so much of this computational practice, a lot of this spatial computation, and in so many of its visual studies and tech courses. And so there was also a lot of talk among the adjunct professors that are in those courses of visual studies and tech courses that said, we could get like so many of the recent graduates are pursuing tech. We can see how it's reshaping the field. And we know that architects should be coining this and, we're already doing it. So why don't we coin it? There's also like a recognition that we can get so much further if we just put a bit more structure around it, give a little deeper technology background, try and source some software engineers to apply for the program and get them to learn about 3D modeling and some of the spatial and social implications of technology. So I think it was just, that was like kind of the drive, is very much it already exists and it just needs a bit more structure to give some of the technical rigor that students can really get further. And to also have, I think there's a recognition that there are a lot of maybe urban tech like programs out there, but one thing Columbia does absolutely well, along with their technology, is really having a critical and theoretical bent. So really important as people are developing new technologies. If you're developing the algorithm for Tinder, I hope that you have someone on your team that's thinking about cities or thinking about the social impact of this thing. So kind of like a recognition that those need to go hand in hand. So I think some of the maybe you should try and steal Laura Kurgan for a follow-up interview, because I think she'll have a lot of amazing things to say on this program. But I think it's really intended at being like having a lot of flavors of this spatial computation, in many ways looking to be very much an activist program or an entrepreneurial program, where you have people coming in essentially developing a thesis that they'll take on during this master's program. And so I think it'll set folks up really well to start to take a more active place in changing the industry, not just like going out and making new roles in tech companies that didn't before think about spatial computation as a formal role, but also like finding opportunities for new companies, or like maybe getting a grant to do an activist project, or do a body of research that investigates like the implications of Yelp on the movement in cities or something,
I see. Like when I was like reading about the courses and the instructors who are like uh, sharing their work in this curriculum, I felt like this is the need of the hour. You guys like did an incredible job of compiling this and giving the opportunity for students to think broadly and like cover a wide spectrum. So I know we are almost close to 1 hour mark. So uh, to be cautious of time, I have like few questions related for like students. So, what is the trend you are currently observing among the students? Are students going for more conventional design role, computational design, or software development?
Yeah. Um, I definitely see a lot of folks going into computational design. And I've seen that more as a formal role in the recent past. We have computational designers at Sidewalk Labs, which was a role that emerged after the Delph product emerged. We didn't have it maybe 3 years ago. I don't know, it might even be only 2 years old. I'm not sure. 2.5. I don't know. It's new. And I see that a lot at other companies. So I think that's a kind of like a unique specific role that sticks out in my head. I think a lot of, what are some of the other roles? I've seen folks go on to do kind of really hard pivots where they go into like UX design. And I think part of that is there's not yet some of these defined roles that are in between. Like, ambient computing is so niche. It doesn't, even UX design is a pretty young field, like in the grander scheme of things, when we look at how long architects have been around. So all this stuff is still very new. And I think a lot of students that are graduating now are, I don't know, I feel like it's easy to say this, but I think, or easy to just throw this around, but I do think that people graduating now are going to have to kind of come up with some of the new roles, like the things that they're going to be doing in 5 and 10 years. Those roles, the names of those roles might not exist. Just like computational design, like Sidewalk Labs didn't have a role for that until a few years ago. So who knows?
I see. And I also see like a lot of computational designers going into fashion design, jewelry design, like shoes design. So
that's true. Yeah. Nike is kind of well known for hiring computational designers.
And I want to end the interview on like few light questions. So how does a day in your life look like?
Ooh. I usually, okay, this is going to be overly detailed. I usually wake up, I go out on my balcony, at which point my dog makes like a kind of meow noise telling me that she wants to come outside. So she comes out on the balcony. On a good day, I do some sit-ups. On a bad day, I don't. Don't ask me what percentage that happens. And then I usually take my dog for a walk. And then I get some coffee and pastries in the neighborhood with my partner. And then I usually log on to work. That usually entails going on to what we call pivotal. It's like a product manager's, like how you track an agile sprint, like who's doing what. Usually follow up on things there. There's usually a bunch of like kind of Slack and email catch up. Then usually I have back-to-back meetings during the day, and those can range from like highly detail oriented and tactical to like trying to zoom out and think more strategically about where the Delph product is headed. And sometimes that's like doing competitive market mapping or thinking about a series of features. Then sometimes, some days I teach. So in the evening I would be teaching, or sometimes I'll have something like this, like talking about a course. Then end of the day, usually my partner and I will take my dog out again. And usually we'll have some whiskey at the end of the day. I drink more than I should do sit-ups. I'll say that. And then, yeah, then usually we'll like lament things that went poorly during the day, talk about things we're excited about, and yeah, do something at the end of the day. Usually some random activity. I've been trying to renovate my house. I knocked down a wall recently.
Ooh.
Yes. So sometimes stuff like that. And that's about it.
Yeah. What's the name of your dog?
Isamu.
Isamu. Nice.
If you know Isamu Noguchi, the landscape architect and sculptor, that's who she's named after. And I know it's a guy's name, but we named her Isamu.
Oh. I see. Which city or country is in your travel bucket list?
Cities, countries on my bucket list. I am actually in a phase of my life where I'm not like very eager to travel. I know that's weird after being on lockdown for so long, but I'm like so in the mentality of like having certain career goals that I'm like not thinking about traveling. But maybe I wanted to go to Morocco. I think that'd be cool.
I see. So I should have asked other way around. Like, which city do you like the most based on the culture, user behavior pattern?
Oh, I really like Barcelona. I like the mixture of new and old there, and I think the quirkiness of like Gaudi and the Sagrada Familia, like I don't know, it's also like a very design oriented culture and a very active city. So yeah.
Yeah, it's a lovely city. Is there any book or mentor who made a big impact in your life?
Laura Kurgan made a big impact. She's the director of this program, and someone who I would try and take all of her courses when I was at GSAP. She was the one person that was saying like, you don't need to do architecture. Like you can do architecture in your own way. And then Jaron Lanier wrote a book called You Are Not a Gadget. Talks a lot about how things like Facebook are reshaping behavior. He was like an early VR entrepreneur back in like I want to say like the 80s or 90s. I don't know the actual year, but he's a great author.
I see. And my last question is, if you have unlimited time and resources, what is one thing you would do?
World peace? No. I feel like that's an obligatory answer. I don't know. I think I would like probably try and make a design education that thinks about this kind of things, like the impact of technology on behavior, more universal. Like, I think it would do wonders if we thought about this kind of stuff, not just in college, but, growing up. I think it would really change culture if I think every child should be thinking critically about the way their phones and their spaces are designed and like what are the affordances of these systems and how might they change how you think and where you move. I think it would probably be something like that.
I see. And I also feel like the moment you make the person feel the importance of the technology and the possibilities, it's a totally different approach than just saying, okay, AI is going to change the world. But if they feel it, then they are more motivated to learn and develop more.
Yeah, totally.
I think we exceeded 2 minutes. So thanks a lot, Violet, for this amazing conversation and sharing your work and thoughts. I learned a lot. And thanks everyone for watching.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Have a nice rest of your day.
Okay, thank